15 months of violence, a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel has come into effect 3 hours later than planned. Hamas had released 33 Israeli, or set to release 33 Israeli hostages, including 3 named yesterday in exchange for hundreds of Palestinians held in Israel. Israeli forces will withdraw from Gaza's populated areas, allowing displaced residents to return home. Meanwhile, tensions remain high after Israeli strikes killed 19 people in Gaza. That happened yesterday morning. Milena Ansari is an Israel and Palestine researcher from Human Rights Watch and joins us now live from Jerusalem. Milena, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. Tell us about what the atmosphere is like in Jerusalem following the deal that has been struck, but also now we understand at least 90 Palestinian prisoners have now been released from Israel, and then the 3 hostages that have also now been released by Hamas.
Good morning and thank you. Well, to answer your first question on the atmosphere, the soul's or internal feelings are of joy and happiness. But as you know, Israeli forces have banned families of those released Palestinian prisoners and detainees from celebrating. For example, in Jerusalem, around 12 Palestinian Jerusalemite detainees and prisoners were released, but Israeli forces went to their family homes ahead of their release in order to make sure that the families are not celebrating. There are no flags, no music, no gatherings of their families. They were, the Palestinian families were under strict orders and instructions by the Israeli police in Jerusalem not to celebrate and not to have any gatherings. But if I go a bit step back, just to better understand, there are around 10,400 Palestinian prisoners and detainees, including 3,000 of them under administrative detention, so no charge and no trial, and under secret information. Those released yesterday were 90, including women and children. They were supposed to be released around 4 p.m. yesterday, but when they were actually released, or the families or people awaiting them only received them at 1 a.m., 1 in the morning. So the families waited for hours for their loved ones. When we heard from the Palestinian released detainees, you know, in the beginning, there were clear changes in their appearance that does indicate ill treatment in their detention. One prominent Palestinian parliamentarian, Khalida Jarrar, was released yesterday after since she's been in detention, administrative detention. So again, no charge, no trial, since December 2023. And she was put in isolation for months. And you can definitely see the visible, you know, the harm, the ill treatment that was in detention on their bodies, on their faces, without saying, of course, there was internal happiness inside, happiness to be liberated and free. We've heard from those detainees released about the process of their release. If I speak about the Moon prison, where mostly there were 80 Palestinian prisoners and detainees, women and girls detained in the Moon prison. From what we heard from those released, they were taken outside of prison at 1 p.m. That day, but only were with their families at 1 a.m. So around 12 hours in the whole process of being released. They sat in the cold for around 2 hours waiting for the process to happen. Many of the women spoke about being extremely cold and also still being terrified, because when they were out in the cold sitting for 2 hours, Israeli forces had military dogs surrounding them as well.
Yeah. The question that a lot of people have is that, considering that you have 3 phases to the ceasefire deal, is whether or not it would be able to last until phase 3, which amongst others include the reconstruction of what has been damaged and destroyed by Israel.
We're hopeful. We all need this ceasefire. Parties on both sides need to respect and commit to their obligations under the phases. Unfortunately, we do have to be realistic as well. We have been hearing from Israeli officials that they don't even intend to go past phase one. You have Israeli parliamentarians and officials tweeting and going on interviews saying we will only be satisfied with phase one. Of course, these are such negative and pessimistic news to be hearing from Israeli officials. But regardless, we are seeing an increase in humanitarian aid entering Gaza. I've read about a reported 600 trucks entering yesterday of aid the Gaza Strip. But again, what we need during this time is not only a few trucks. We need a flow, an unfettered flow of humanitarian aid. To give you a picture, before October 2023, before the current the hostilities, there were 500 trucks entering Gaza daily, and that was when the situation was a bit better with regards to food, water, fuel as well. So now when we talk about 600, that's a good step, because we haven't heard about this number for the past 15 months, but that doesn't mean this is enough to really reconstruct and build. We've seen families who have been displaced in the Gaza Strip go back to the northern area where Israeli forces have withdrawn from some of these areas. So there are some positive steps to really look at and pay attention to. But during the ceasefire period or the phases, for Human Rights Watch, we really focused on unfettered humanitarian aid as well as medical evacuation. The health system in the Gaza Strip has completely collapsed the past 15 months due to the hostilities, actions by Israeli forces. So medical evacuations are also extremely necessary. Israeli forces need to open all border crossings in order to bring aid in, but also to get people out who need life-saving treatment that's not available in the Gaza Strip. The other point Human Rights Watch will be focusing on is accountability. The mass atrocities and the heinous atrocities that were taking part the past 15 months should not go without accountability. There should be accountability to the perpetrators of these crimes, and we are pushing and advocating for such accountability. And there are many possibilities. We're talking about the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and the former defense minister and the leader of the Hamas military wing, Mohammed al-Dayf. So these accountability measures are needed to be followed. And I mentioned this because, we're hearing from Poland, for example, that if the prime minister goes to their country, they won't execute the arrest warrants against them. And this is, in complete disregard to international law, to the International Criminal Court. And these should not be happening. States should be clear with executing these arrest warrants and remind themselves what their statements were when Putin was issued an arrest warrant. They were all committed to executing them. So these double standards with regards to accountability should also be taken, removed when we're talking about the period of ceasefire.
I want to quickly go back to what happened after October the 7th. The next month, this is now in November, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the time said that the Israeli Defense Force will control Gaza after the war and rejects the notion of an international force. As it stands currently, do you think that that is a possibility at all? And if that is a possibility, what type of work should we be seeing from the international community, including, in this particular case, the Trump administration?
So definitely, I'll answer this with reminding us of a research Human Rights Watch released about the forced displacement of 1.9 million Palestinians in some areas in the Gaza Strip, so around the buffer zone between southern Israel and Gaza, and in areas of the security corridors, the Newzroom corridor and Philadelphia corridor. We concluded that there is ethnic cleansing in these areas. What I mean by this is that these areas are under complete control of the Israeli forces. There is no ability for Palestinians to go back to these areas, and they have been uninhabitable due to the extreme destruction in these areas. So we do have an open mind, and we are looking at the reality on the ground and not only statements of promising withdrawal from these areas. And in some areas, it's very difficult to understand how Israeli forces will, let go of their control of these areas. But it will take time, and we are waiting to see what the situation will be. But to better understand, so Gaza is under occupation. It has been for decades. So that doesn't change even with the withdrawal. There's still an unlawful siege on Gaza, land, air, and water as well. So if we're advocating for anything, or what states need to be doing, is condemning the reality of the Gaza Strip that's under an occupation by the Israeli authorities. So this siege needs to be lifted. There needs to be no blockade on the Gaza Strip. And these are the positive demands that states should be urging Israel to do. And this is just the minimum that
Yep.
we're talking about.